what if the whole sinus infection's got to do with mold and mycotoxins triggering an inflammatory response? Right. Well, that can't be possible. And like I said to him, well, why can't you just prescribe me an antifungal nose spray and then we'll know, oh, no, here's your second prescription. I remember I went home and I compounded my own nasal spray.
Vigorous podcast with the one and only Dr. Dean St.Mart for part 2. It's been a year since we last talked. And the last podcast we did, we got a lot of good response, a lot of views, probably one of the most viewed podcasts that I had after Bio Bros. So here we are again. We're going to continue where we left off. How have you been, man?
I'm good. I think last time we spoke, I was just coming to the end of my last ever off season before my prep last year. And then obviously I went into prep then in the May. So I think we had the podcast in April and then 3 weeks later entered into whatever it was, 26 weeks prep.
Yeah, it was very long. And how many shows did you do? You did like 3 or 4 shows?
Six, yeah, 2, and then
6 shows. Wow.
And then four in a row, week after week in October. So I pretty much by the end of it, I probably could have kept going, but I was sort of happy. My long-term goal was to win Mr. Ireland. That was what, like when I started bodybuilding, I'm going to win Mr. Ireland, win my class at the Irish Nationals, and then be happy to retire. Good.
So you finally did that, and then after that, you're like, okay, now it's enough. I mean, 6 shows is quite a bit.
I mean, with the I guess the agreement with my wife was, if I win, I retire. That was the agreement, because there was sort of like throughout it, she's like saying to me, what's going to happen if you don't win? And I'm just saying to her, no, I am winning. Like that was the complete change in mindset last year, was I have won as opposed to I'm turning up to win. It was every single day I've already won. And it sort of showed me that when you want something and you visualize it and that whole, you bring the universe to you, that really like showed me how powerful your mindset has to be in order to create that future.
Mm-hmm. So how bad was the post-contest blues then afterwards? Because I know you're always very dedicated and regimented, like going into the show, and then you win, and you have your 5 minutes of like acute, like total bliss, of course, that you finally accomplish your goals. And then what's next? What's next? Right? So how did that go?
That was a little bit hard, because obviously when you finish a prep, you've almost got your off-season plan, and you've got your sort of off-season cycle and your nutrition, everything set up. After the show is pretty much straight to like your strict TRT, and really just training for fun again. It was more so like there was on Tuesday I'd do like a high intensity, like almost interval training, where I was like incorporating kickboxing back into things and box jumps, and just really just getting back to how I used to train years ago, as opposed to being regimented with chest, back, arms.
Right. Having fun with it, you mean? Having some fun in the gym. Yeah.
Pretty much. And just having I guess when you don't have any plan of where you need to take your physique to, you can be a bit lost, because you're going into the gym thinking, you're not chasing a logbook, or you're not chasing like huge amounts of progressive overload. It's more so I'm training now for health and longevity and all the benefits from training, as opposed to let's get massive.
So it's also a bit of a burden off your shoulder, right? Because of course, when you want to win, you want to put in, everything you can to accomplish that. But sometimes you also realize in the back of your head, like, you know what, maybe the drugs and the PDs, I mean, we're both very health conscious. So in the back of your head, like, I want to win. And then the angel on your shoulder is like, yeah, but you're ruining your health and your lipids are going to be skewed and that kind of stuff. And of course, you do your blood work after the show and you're probably not as happy as you are, winning the show. But
so obviously that, from what I've shared on social media, I waited like my 12, 14 weeks post-show to get an accurate reflection of what everyone knows what their bloods look like on cycle, or they should know what their bloods look like on cycle. And your bloods aren't really going to change a huge amount of variance on cycle versus off. So you should know to expect what your bloods are like on cycle versus off. And so we get to this sort of like 14-week period post-show. I'm expecting like all green lights, green markers. 125 test. I haven't been pushing anything, all health supplements. My diet's been clean. My body fat was probably like still 7-8% in January.
Yeah,
and then
you stayed quite lean after the show. Yeah, that was good to see.
And then it came to the blood work, and like what we seen, my triglycerides were at 7.8, and my LDL couldn't be detected. And I'm messaging you, and I'm messaging a couple other people going, that can't be right. That I'm literally looking at my trend, and the blood work on cycle during prep had triglycerides at 0.9, and I'm thinking something's not right here. With either I've given myself like really bad fatty liver disease with the prep that just has gone undiagnosed and silent, or we've got something seriously else wrong. So obviously we retested the blood work because I work through that UK company, the Blood Lab.
Right.
And even Chris, who runs it, was even like to me, this can't be right. This has to be an assay issue. So we literally do 3 tests every second day for a week, and the same result comes back. And we're like, okay, well, it's not an assay issue. There's something seriously wrong in your body.
Right. Right, and I told you, so maybe it's time to do a liver ultrasound, because this is so high. You know, all your metabolic markers literally look like you had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is weird when you're doing a prep because you're in such a caloric restrictive state. And I mean, your cycle was quite modest. I know on Instagram you posted like apples and oranges and right, because you didn't want to disclose what the cycle was, but I think you were sub 1,000 milligrams. I think 700 milligrams in total.
At the end, it was 1,200. So it was,
okay, yeah.
It was. I think it was 300 test, 600 primo, and 300 mast, and that was it. Obviously, at the end, then it was very small amounts of orals as needed in sort of peak week, but and that you're looking at a very sort of moderate for my body weight. My body weight was 88 kilos, so it's a relatively quote unquote moderate cycle. So you're like looking at it going, the Q score that I sent you from my liver enzymes, even though they were low, was showing that there was a risk of fibrosis. And I'm thinking, all right, well, there has to be something going on here at the liver.
Right.
And then as we go on, it's sort of like none of this makes sense, because even with the diet post-show, for me, was low in fat. Like my calories weren't really high. So none of the fatty liver sort of symptoms or markers lined up with the blood work.
Yeah, so I think the only way it could have been like that if you were secretly slurping a lot of high fructose corn syrup from Coke, you know, like in the end of the day, like, I have my 1 can of Coke, and a can of Coke is actually like a gallon, you know, then it made sense. But, you know, based on your body fat levels, I couldn't really piece it together until you told me that, you know, it was diet related.
Yeah, and so like we started going through it, and I thought it was SIBO, or I thought it was like a backlash, because obviously in December post-show last year during prep, I had really bad SIBO that I just could not treat during the prep, so I was just managing it with diet. And then when it came to December, I then ran a course of rifaximin and metronidazole to kill it off. And that was successful. GI function was restored. We all verified that with GI stool testing. And so now I'm thinking, maybe is my gut flora paying me back for killing off loads of things? And that was something that we talked about. That was SIBO, because then when I looked in the literature, there was things about elevated triglycerides in response to SIBO. And then that sort of fed down another rabbit hole of H. pylori, because one of the
but you checked it that, and there was nothing there, right? Yeah, with the H. pylori.
Zero antibodies. And why we checked that was one of the symptoms that I was having was a small bit of reflux. And to me, having a bit of reflux as a bodybuilder can either be a real silent symptom, or it can be a silent, deadly symptom. When I said it to Chris about the reflux, he said to me, no, this changes the sort of scenery of what we should be sort of looking at. So H. pylori was one. And then the second one was, he said, I'm going to test your ATTA antibodies, so your anti-transglutaminase antibodies for celiac disease. I was like, celiac? And he's like, yeah, I have a suspicion that you're celiac. And I said to him, okay, well, when I done my genetics, we do have that HLA-DR gene that makes your immune system more, I guess, sensitive is the right way to say it. So it presents antigens to your immune system a little more sensitively. And the ATTA came back sky high. It was like in the 3000s. He's like, they've actually sent it to another lab to verify that result is true.
Wow. Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so what ended up happening there was during my off season or whatever, retirement, I was eating bits of bread. I was eating homemade pizzas. Like generally, I wouldn't really eat a lot of gluten. I'd stick to rice-based, even more just for digestion and knowing that gluten-based foods in the past did leave me a little bloated or tired, but you'd sort of expect that with like heavy carb meals, like heavy pizza and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so around the time of the first blood work, I had been eating quite a bit of bread and quite a bit of homemade pizza. So that was when the triglycerides detected it, because any other time before that, when I had blood work, I was just eating my normal like rice-based diet. So it was never being detected.
Right. And then you don't see it off also because all of your metabolic markers are just normal because you don't get this weird inflammatory response and everything kind of building up and backing up in the intestinal tract. Because I've seen some pictures when you had SIBO where your stomach was a little bit out, right? Which we were able to control, with proper nutrition. But of course, like bread and pizza and that kind of dough stuff, that's not diet food. So it was probably already in the back of your head or going on internally. And then, of course, post contest, you're like, okay, the edge is off. You can relax a little bit, go out with family again, eat a little bit more freely. But, with these kinds of inflammatory conditions, it seems to compound itself. Right? The more you eat, the worse it gets. Yeah.
And I mean, it's sort of like, again, like non-alcohol fatty liver disease. It's silent. Like there was no symptoms. There was, maybe looking back in hindsight, was a couple of digestive symptoms. But there was nothing to suggest that my triglycerides were at a level that I was like impending heart attack territory.
Yeah, your blood was basically gravy for a bit.
Yeah, and that's scary because you don't have any symptom that's going on until you have a massive heart attack and it's sort of like scratching your head.
Yeah. So that's why we do blood work, guys, right? As frequently as we can, just to get it on. Because you caught it and resolved it, in just a couple of days, 7 days?
So when we realized it was celiac, we tested again. So obviously the gluten had been removed and it moved from 7 down to 4. And then we went strict gluten-free for 12 weeks and we retested there at the start of July and it was down to 0.9 again. So it really goes to show you your diet has such an impact to your blood without you even realizing that. If you are, following a strict sort of rice-based diet, you might miss a gluten sensitivity if you don't eat it around the time of your bloods. Yeah. Which is sort of what happened for me in the past.
No, and then, like I usually do my blood work on the Sunday morning of doing a refeed or cheat meal, right? So you go in like a week after the last refeed, and then sometimes you see like, wait a minute, my C-reactive protein is a little bit elevated. And some other markers or liver enzymes are slightly higher, or triglycerides are a little bit off. And then you have to think, well, the whole week I was eating healthy food, right? But what about this last meal on Sunday, which I had basically 8 hours the last blood work, right? Or what is it, 132 hours before the blood work? But it can actually last that long. And sometimes what I discussed with clients, sometimes they feel really, really off the day after a refeed or cheat meal. And it's actually because of the foods that they're eating. They're having this acute inflammatory response from this 1 meal or 2 meals that they have over the weekend. And then Monday, the workout suffers, and you think, was it the metformin? Was it the pizza? Right? Or was it just like the lactose, right, from the cheese? And then you kind of have to piece it together. But, it just pays and it shows that the older you get, and after a couple of courses of performance-enhancing drugs, you just got to eat super clean 24/7 because otherwise you just mess up yourself,
Yeah. I mean, that really, like I was saying to you, when we went away on holiday, I did not train. The nearest gym was like a 30-minute drive, and I was just like, you know what, we're exploring. We went over to Mauritius, where my dad's from. We were exploring the island. There was just too much on an activity to actually dedicate to training. So I done the unspeakable and literally went, right, no training for 3 weeks, just enjoy the holiday. You're not going to lose any gains.
Stop the podcast. I just took 5 weeks off to recover some injuries, so it's all good.
And this is probably an important message for people. Like, you're not going to lose massive amounts of muscle tissue by taking time off to go on holiday and vacation. If if the gym had been a 5-minute drive or a 5-minute walk, then yeah, I might have gone for like half an hour, 40 minutes in the morning, done a quick workout. But to take that much time away from your sort of family vacation, you sort of have to weigh up, what's to be gained from going to the gym versus what's to be gained with spending time with your young boys and whatever. So
exactly.
you have to.
I mean, right, and you're working full time, and the boys are going to school. So this is like the only opportunity you have to spend the whole entire day with the kids. That's not the weekend. Yeah, man, I wouldn't go to the gym if I was in that position.
Yeah.
I would just go walk around and have fun, and do whatever the kids want to do. And I'm sure you got leaner in the process, walking around chasing everybody down.
That was it. I mean, I went away at 91 kilos. I came back at 91 kilos. A little softer.
Okay, that's good.
But maintain my weight, and that wasn't even tracking any food. So this time, literally just had something for breakfast, something maybe in the middle of the day, and then wait for dinner. And that was as normal sort of routine as I've had in God knows how many years.
Right. Yeah, you need to go away from home and from the gym before you can actually experience that. I'm going to Japan for about 11 days in September. So the first 2 weeks of September, I go to Japan, and I'm sure I'll do exactly the same.
Just take in the culture and
be a tourist, have some, eat some Kobe beef, and go to Kyoto and Osaka and go to Super Mario World. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, and then hopefully by the time I don't look like a dough ball. Let's see. So right now you got everything kind of sorted, and you're back on the normal bodybuilding regime, excluding the bread and the
literally just back to a rice-based diet. Like I was going to say, when we were on holiday, it was just a minefield, like being a celiac in a foreign country, and let alone a language barrier. So you're trying to explain in French. Like, my French isn't as good as it used to be, but you're trying to explain to them that you have this allergy to wheat, let alone saying celiac, and they're like, going, an allergy to wheat? And it came to the point where I just gave up most nights, and I was just like, just steak and chips. And then, even then, I got to see how sensitive you become when you are celiac, because I could tell when, say, chips were fried in the same oil as like chicken nuggets or sort of battered food, that you seen this cross-contamination. And I mean, when I learned of being celiac, I said to Morgan, I don't want to be one of these people that were out for food and were like, did that touch a bit of gluten? I have to be really strict. I didn't want to turn into one of these anal people of like being so paranoid.
You're finally retired from bodybuilding, but you're still bringing your fucking Tupperware with you because you have celiac disease. What do you have there, sir? Chicken, rice, and broccoli, sir.
And that's sort of like, when it came to most nights, I was just like to Morgan, this is just roulette. Like, let's just pray that tomorrow morning that my bowel is good, because I could tell my bowel function would be perfect, and all of a sudden you'd have like a loose stool the next morning, and you'd know, okay, well, there was gluten in that meal. Not a lot, but enough to tell your immune system do a bit of intestinal damage. And then we had a family meal, and we were trying to explain to them, how serious this allergy was. And I'm eating the food. They prepared burgers and they prepared chicken, and I'm eating the burger. I'm thinking, okay, this tastes not homemade. This tastes like, a frozen beef burger that would have flour and ground onion into it. And I'm thinking, no, they've said it's homemade, so I'm going to keep eating it. And within 20 minutes, I had to excuse myself and run to the bathroom. And all that night, I had like really bad gas. And then the next morning, I woke up and I looked 9 months pregnant. My belly was like out here. And my parents, obviously, were on holiday with my parents. My parents looked at me and said, Jesus, this is serious. I'm like, going, you don't think so, do you?
Yeah. So your wife was pregnant, it was less.
Yeah. But I mean, it felt like sandpaper was rubbing on my guts. And then this fatigue came over me where I literally slept for 16 hours straight. We went out to this nature park that like Sunday morning. I managed to walk around the nature park with the boys, trying to keep, happy. And as soon as we got back to our apartment, straight to bed. I literally slept from like 3 o'clock till 8 o'clock the next morning.
Wow.
And it's just
that's crazy.
This fatigue where your body's just like, you need to go to sleep. There's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's just preventing you from either more of that kind of stuff, you know? So yeah, at least have some time to kind of pass it along. And how long did it take you to kind of get over that episode?
So I would say it was Sunday, slept all the way till Monday, and then I fasted, just water fasted all day Monday until about 8:30 Monday evening when we went for dinner, and then I just had something small at dinner time. But in result to that, it left me like lactose intolerant, because then 2 days later we went and we got ice cream with the boys, and my gut was turned inside out. So obviously with celiac, your gut is basically eating itself. It's your immune system is attacking the gut. Obviously that's sort of the sort of soft villi structures in your small intestine are where lactase gets secreted, and they're like the first cells to get damaged or mowed away by your immune system. So the lactose intolerance has sort of only started to resolve itself now, which is maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks after.
Wow, that's a long time.
So really shows you, like, with that intestinal damage, what ends up happening to that immune function, and obviously your digestive function with it.
Yeah, and that's catching it early on. I mean, you know how many people walk around with this undiagnosed and have no idea, and they don't do an elimination diet or address it, and they have all kinds of serious issues, and then they have to do a carnivore diet to fix it, which is basically, you know, the biggest elimination diet you can do, which you can only eat animal meat-based sources, right, and exclude everything else, including the processed stuff, and that's how they fix themselves. Did you do some oral BPC 157 to kind of, you know, bring some calmness to your intestinal tract? And
that as soon as we got back, I introduced that, and then I introduced what I said to you, the Larazotide. So I was at the health optimization summit, that biohacking summit in London, and a follower, apologies, I can't remember, I'm really bad with names, but he came to me and said, "Oh, have you heard about Larazotide?" I was like, "No." And he said, "Oh, well, my dad's celiac and we've trialed this in him. You know, have a Google of, you know, PubMed studies on Larazotide." And when you research into it, they gave celiac patients either 250 milligrams, 500 milligrams, or 1 gram over like a 6-week period, and then measured the levels of zonulin. So obviously looking at how tight the intestinal barrier was, and looking for the levels obviously to decrease to make sure that the junctions were tightening again. And they seen huge results in that like 250 to 500 milligram dose region. So I've been taking that the last 2 weeks at 250 milligrams twice a day. And I have to say, I've noticed quite a lot of improvements to the digestive function, but also to the sort of inflammation around my gut. So there's less water retention. The sort of visualism much more improved. So right now I'm taking 500 micrograms of BPC 157, the 250 milligrams of Larazotide twice a day, and then I've KPV in, if you've ever read about KPV.
No, enlighten us, please.
KPV is a tripeptide, but it has really strong antimicrobial and antifungal properties. So it's really useful if you potentially have candida overgrowth.
This sounds like PT77? No, there was another peptide who has very similar properties. It could actually be the same thing, but a different abbreviation. I have it in one of my intestinal health videos. It's just the abbreviation eludes me. KPV. It's probably the same thing. It's like something that you would secrete endogenously, but it goes systemic, right? But if you take it orally or injectable version, it actually kind of resets your gut microbiome, but only keeps the gut biome. Yeah, it's probably the same stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, and it helps obviously with butyrate production, and so I've put that in. Very hard to say what great effect it's had just yet, but I mean, considering the amount of damage that's probably been there from years of abuse, any sort of small help is going to help.
Yeah, and when we're talking about abuse, we're talking about pizza and bread, not about oral steroids, right? And everybody's like, yeah, I knew he was on 50 milligrams Anadrol per day. That's why his gut is messed up. Right, but that's the common story with most bodybuilders. They just take copious amounts of Anadrol their entire off season, including very famous Mr. Olympias, and then they wreck their intestinal health. You know, and they need to undergo all kinds of treatments to kind of fix that.
I delved into on our SN education way, like biochemistry of trying to figure out what was the mechanism of orals ruining your appetite and ruining obviously intestinal health. And you actually start to see that it's got to do with how your bile acids interact with like your CCKY and your ghrelin in your intestine. So one of the like easiest things you can probably do to offset some of that appetite destruction with orals is optimizing bile flow with TUDCA, and then optimizing fatty acid transport across your liver. So choline and inositol. The sort of the theory behind the liver stack that I made.
Right.
But when
and it's good to run year round anyway, because it helps tremendously with liver health. Yes. And did you ever add in the ox bile to help with the breakdown?
That's what's in liver stack. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So you start to see obviously that when you have these appetite issues with orals, it probably stems back to your bile flow potentially being so sluggish and fatty acids not being able to feed directly into the duodenum. And then obviously you have these appetite regulatory hormones like CCKY and ghrelin and whatever else being inhibited because of that lack of bile flow. So obviously your intestine is looking for that drip feed of bile down into it, and when it's not receiving it, it's going to tell your brain to slow everything down. Right.
And then the fact that your intestinal lining also has androgen receptors, right? That's the outside of your, of course, so this hypertrophy is, and now the normal contractile capacity of your, intestinal tract is altered, right? You get more forceful contractions, but also it's more difficult to absorb these nutrients because these little fingers that are in your intestinal tract, right, where the nutrients kind of pass into the central circulation, that I think gets impaired as well. And then you have aromatase enzymes and 17-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzymes within the intestinal tract. So whatever you take orally gets now converted into these weird metabolites who haven't really been investigated. So that's why I think nowadays we either do sublingual or just don't take orals anymore.
The sublingual is always the one where people are sort of like, how does that actually work? And you're trying to explain to them, well, like you've got this really thin buccal membrane underneath your tongue that molecules will rapidly pass underneath the surface of the tongue through this membrane straight into your bloodstream. So you're completely bypassing first pass metabolism. So first off, the drug is going straight into your bloodstream, off around the body, and then some of it is going to get absorbed, obviously, through digestion and passed by the liver, but you're sort of bypassing that with the sublingual. So that tends to be my favorite way of doing it, that you just literally put it, and it has to show that your tablet has been made correctly, because that's another thing. If the coating agents on the tablet don't allow the tablet to dissolve efficiently under your tongue,
that's very true.
You're pretty much going to be just swallowing powder basically, as opposed to absorbing. So it does depend on what coating the lab is.
I think the United Standard Pharmacopoeia or United States Pharmacopoeia instructs that it should dissolve in 20 minutes. So that's usually enough time for, this active pharmaceutical ingredient to kind of pass into the saliva ducts and gets absorbed for systemic circulation. And then, usually the best way to explain it, especially for the people who have, experience with recreational drugs, it basically works the same as, snorting something. Right? That's also very easy to absorb, active pharmaceutical ingredient. And this is basically the idea behind, the nootropics like Semax and Celiac and a couple of the other ones. Right? You get it intranasally, it goes straight into your brainstem. And with sublingual absorption, it goes straight into the, bloodstream, and then it works systemically. Although with Anadrol, you're missing out on this mestanolone metabolite, which, due to its androgenic rating, might be actually one of the reasons why Anadrol is so potent. And some of this non-genomic effects might be missing out on that. Albeit that I will say that I've done Anadrol sublingually and orally, And I would say that the pumps and the effects are pretty much the same. Now, what is going on genetically, I'm not sure. Yeah, but I think bypassing this, the oral absorption is something we can save ourselves a lot of gut issues down the line.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's sort of where they tried to do injectable orals as well, that you're just putting a suspension of the powder into the muscle. Probably a lot more painful than sublingual, to be honest.
The problem is that the carrier oils that they use, the glycol and the etholeate and polyethylene glycol or propylene glycol. It's funny. I saw somewhere that people were talking about that testosterone can cause test flu, right, through one of the metabolites, ethylconolinone, or one of it goes through 5-alpha reductase, and then somewhere down the line you have one of these last metabolites, which was specifically investigated to see if it can cause fever and post-injection pain and kind of an allergic response. And all of those old studies, they compounded the whatever you pronounce it, ethio, etc. All in propylene glycol, which is one of the most toxic injectables you can take. And then 20 years later, they figured out in some scientific literature that this is one of the most toxic stuff you can actually compound stuff in, and you should definitely keep it away from kids because they had severe allergic responses and horrible post-injection pain and that kind of stuff. So when you go through the scientific literature, you realize that, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with the metabolite. It's the carrier oil that they were using for this particular study. And all these studies that they investigated this metabolite in, all synthetic carrier oils. So it's funny how you can kind of, you go through the timeline of how these studies are performed, and then you realize with new information found later on, all of the other older studies, they kind of become invalid. Even though now you go to, even though now you go to Wikipedia or wherever they cite these studies, they still say ethylconolone is causing fever. It's very funny to me.
I always thought when it came to test flu that if there was a logical mechanism to it, it was upregulation of your innate immune system, because obviously your white blood cells and your mast cells have androgen receptors. So you've obviously gone from a physiological state where your immune cells aren't being activated to a super physiological state. And especially if you go to a really high dosage very quickly, that sort of spillover of activation is happening in your immune system where your macrophages are just getting stimulated. And obviously you'll see an immune response where your immune system starts attacking any small little virus that's present and see that upregulation of immune function.
Right.
So that was sort of
and
where
body temperature goes up and all that kind of stuff, right?
It's more so if you were ever to pick a biochemistry or sort of a mechanism to it's that upregulation of the innate. But obviously there's sort of conflicting pieces of information when we look at immune function when it comes to androgens, and that on one side your innate immune system, which is like your macrophages, your neutrophils, the guys that come in and respond first, they get upregulated. But the other side is that your adaptive immunity gets dampened. So you've sort of got two crossfires where your immunity to existing pathogens decreases. So if there is a cold or a flu going round, you're more susceptible to letting it into the system. But then you've got the reverse, and that the innate immune system is upregulated, so it's going to attack this pathogen. So when someone asked me like years ago about test flu, that was the only logical thing that I could think of from like the literature studies we've done on immune function and androgens.
Right. Yeah, you see that some guys that have this supposed test flu, right? Whether that's the immune system or the carrier oil. What I usually tell them is that why don't you switch from an underground lab to actual pharmaceutical, where the carrier oil actually matches a little bit the release time and the half-life of the ester, instead of just dumping it all in the bloodstream with etholeate or MCT oil for that matter. Right?
Yeah.
Of course, and then you get this super high spike of testosterone, and it all gets metabolized into DHT and estrogen and all that stuff. And then you tell them, so okay, why don't we switch the brands? Why don't we go with Bayer or something, compounded in grapeseed oil without etholeate, right? Not the underground lab way where they say grapeseed oil, but they actually have 20% etholeate in there. None of this shit. And then they switch, and then they realize, like, wait a minute, my test flu is actually non-existent. Of course, you give them adequate time for the immune system also to kind of adapt to the situation. But these peaks and valleys, they're a lot less severe with the pharmaceuticals because the carrier oil is so thick and it takes days to metabolize.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of view on even pathogens and illness has sort of changed over the last couple of years. And to me, when you get ill, so you've got two theories, obviously, and not to get into all mad stuff, but you've got terrain theory and you've got like the pathogen theory, germ theory. Terrain is basically your body sets the scene for you to get sick, and then germ theory is it's the germs that make you ill. And what I've sort of come to understand myself when you get ill, and especially when you try and heal yourself when you're ill, is that when you develop an illness or develop illness symptoms, it tends to be an antioxidant debt that you have to pay back to the body. And so, like,
that makes sense.
One of my favorite protocols, if you ever get sick, again, this is hypothetical speaking, is either you can do IV glutathione, but liposomal glutathione, because it's so easy to access, you do 500 milligrams of liposomal glutathione every 2 to 3 hours with a big bolus dose of vitamin A and vitamin D. So obviously you're upregulating the vitamin A and vitamin D receptors to enhance innate immune function, and electrolytes, making sure you're getting adequate sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. So again, you're hydrating the cells, which may be under toxic burden. But most people that follow that sort of protocol, within 2 days, their cold symptoms, flu symptoms are gone. And so I'm starting to wonder...
Where's the vitamin C?
Well, liposomal vitamin C.
I'm joking. It's been shown now that it doesn't really contribute that much.
But it does actually, because what you've touched on a very good point there. Vitamin C is very important because it recycles vitamin E and glutathione from the oxidized form of glutathione back to the reduced. Right. So vitamin C is important. I was going to get to that, in that if you put a load of glutathione into your system and it gets rapidly oxidized to the oxidized form, in order for that to recycle back, you do need vitamin C. So again, if you're not taking vitamin C daily, you're going to need a big dose in to help that glutathione recycle effectively back to reduced GSH. So anyone who gets ill, when you follow this sort of protocol, their illness sort of disappears. And then to me, over the last few years, it's sort of like, maybe when you get ill, you're ill because you've got this antioxidant, I guess, deficit, or you've got this oxidation burden that your body's not able to keep up with, and so you feel these physical symptoms.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people that take steroids, of course, then they're in more oxidative stress environments, because they, steroids and training, is literally studies out there that show that the oxidative stress goes up tenfold compared to people who just train without steroids. So you create this antioxidant deficit that you just mentioned, and people don't supplement accordingly, whether that's with the vitamin C or the glutathione, injectable or liposomal, or the NAC, right? N-acetylcysteine with glycine to help with glutathione production. And even taurine, and all these other antioxidants, ubiquinol. I think a lot of people are doing themselves a disservice and thus are more susceptible to getting sick.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I've just seen it countless times over the years, even with like consult clients with impaired immune function. Myself, even when we moved into this house, we had the toxic mold and the mycotoxin mess that I had to clean up. That was an antioxidant debt, as to speak, because I needed a lot of glutathione and a lot of bile to pull those toxins out of the system. So you start to see that, like, the whole mold toxicity with me was that I kept getting sinus infections. And I remember saying to my medical doctor, I went back for 2 antibiotics, and I said to him, how is this possible that we've tried like a macrolide antibiotic and now we're going with a tetracycline? Like we pretty much gone with the 2 heaviest, because I'm allergic to penicillin. We've pretty much gone with the 2 heaviest to kill off microbes. What if the whole sinus infections got to do with mold and mycotoxins triggering an inflammatory response? Right. Oh, that can't be possible. And like I said to him, well, why can't you just prescribe me an antifungal nose spray and then we'll know? Oh, no, here's your second prescription. I remember I went home and I compounded my own nasal spray. I got
There you
myconazole
go.
and ketoconazole cream, and compounded my own nasal spray with saline water, and sprayed out my
Oh, so you had to
nose.
dilute the cream, huh?
Yeah, so basically, because it was 1% cream, I literally just worked out a standard dose of 1%, weighed it out, got my pestle and mortar, gently heated it up with sterile water, and then just bought a nasal diffuser and was just doing 2 pumps up into my nasal cavity of myconazole and ketoconazole that you get over the counter. I was just like, this, you know, like, I'm trying to explain to you what I think is going on based on what my environment said, and you're like, oh, mold doesn't exist, mold doesn't cause X, Y, and Z. And it's slowly like that paradigm is slowly shifting, because a lot of people are starting to see a lot of chronic health issues that are like unexplained. Oh, let's do a mycotoxin test. And then they do a mycotoxin urinalysis, and you see all like basically infestations of like ochratoxin, or what's the other one that is very much like is it zearalenone? I think there's one of them that basically mimics estrogen in your body. And I'm seeing this quite a bit with consults, that you have this, as far as I know, it's zearalenone. It basically acts like 17-beta estradiol in a male. So I'm seeing issues in consults of guys with prolactin issues, reoccurring gyno issues. And so you do like a Dutch test. So you do a urinary analysis to look at the metabolites. And then you see there's this roadblock at 16 hydroxyestradiol. And then you see a roadblock at more so 4 hydroxyestradiol. And you're sort of like, okay, well, 4 hydroxyestradiol needs glutathione to come out. You implement like a protocol, a methylation protocol, and antioxidants to help recycle and basically eliminate that estrogenic load. You sort of, again, you educate them on xenoestrogens, on plastics and everything else, what dewash themselves in the environment. And so you get to this sort of route then where you see a mild improvement to like this reoccurring gyno, but it's not disappearing. Their blood work looks perfect. The estradiol level in their blood is perfect. Progesterone is perfect. Their prolactin is slightly elevated, but not too high. Right. But then you get them to do a mycotoxin test, and all of a sudden you see this zearalenone and ochratoxin sky high, and you're sort of like, now we're starting to see that a lot of the environment is causing a lot of health issues that we're completely, I guess, unaware of, or we're not classically trained about when you look at pharmacology and conventional medicine.
And it's not something you see on the blood work parameters, right? With conventional testing, you really need those specific tests, which it's not something you can get through your primary healthcare provider in many cases. And then, and of course, mold toxicity is rare, but it's not uncommon, especially in the Western world, you know, where it's nice and damp and it's like the ideal temperature for mold. And sometimes you don't even see it. The mold is underneath the house and it kind of recirculates through some of the air vents, you know, that some people have in the floor, right? And it's very unfortunate when that happens, because some people get it undiagnosed for years, just like Lyme disease, right? They got bitten by a tick a decade ago and they still walk around with it.
Yeah. And it's sort of like Lyme disease, where the pathogen is evading the immune system. Generally with mold, it's either it's taking up residency inside your sinus cavity. Like your sinus cavity is a damp, dark environment. So why wouldn't mold want to grow in your sinus?
It's a perfect place for it. Yeah, it's a perfect place.
And so like when you're getting reoccurring sinus infections and you're going back antibiotic after antibiotic, eventually you just have to go, hang on, something's not right here. And what led me down that rabbit hole was when I had the first exposure, we went away for a weekend, me and Morgan, to like a spa hotel. And I remember they had a really hot, dry sauna. I think it was like 105 degrees. And I think it was like the hottest sauna I've ever been in. I was sitting in it for 20 minutes. My nasal cavity started to feel like really unblocked, and I was able to smell really well. I was like, wow, my breathing has really improved being in here. Got out, wiped myself off on the towel. I looked at the towels on, it's black stuff all over the towel. I was like, what?
From sweat?
From my sweat. There was all this black stuff in my sweat. I got back in the sauna again, and I kept repeating it until my sweat was basically clear and I wasn't wiping anything off. Then that night, I had the best sleep ever, where my body was just like completely relaxed. There was no sort of inflammatory response. And then I remember then the next day just Googling on my phone about excretion of mycotoxins, and one of the primary routes is through your sweat. So
sweat, yeah.
that was like what put me down the rabbit hole of like then like saying to Morgan, "Oh, I've got mold toxicity," because you're sort of like, you know, that not gaslighting you, but like, yeah, you know, whatever, not
This
really
has to
taking
be
it
it.
seriously. Yeah. And so I went and I paid, because this is another thing, like in consults, you're trying to explain to someone, we need to do this test. And then they're looking at the price, but it's like £300. And they're going,
Yeah.
oh, do I have to pay that much money?
Test, yeah, same as a Dutch test or stool examinations. I mean, it costs a pretty buck, you know, but like if you want to take care of your health, you're just going to have to dish out. I mean, I've went through the ringer the last couple of years, just preventative heart screening, right? Because it's this day and age. And I just paid out of pocket, but you know, you have to. I'm not going to wait until somebody writes me a prescription when I'm already sick and half dead. You got to do it preventatively, you know, if you suspect it. And otherwise, okay, you spend the $300 to rule it out, but then you can continue to the next step instead of having it in the back of your head like, you know, maybe it is, but the £300, it's a bit much.
Yeah, like then my okra toxin came back and it was like at 80. They don't have an actual range because it's like per millimole of creatinine in your urine, but it's basically on their chart was sky high. And I was like to Morgan when it came through, see now I wasn't like just messing in my head, like this is something serious. And then you actually show her the research paper on okra toxicity in humans, and it's like causing stage 2 kidney cancers. So
oh shit,
you're like explaining to her like this is like extremely nephrotoxic, like the quicker you get this out of the system the better. Yeah,
everybody's still complaining about Boldenone being nephrotoxic. You got actually some serious nephrotoxicity going on.
You look, and like, I mean, that only for the recurrent sinus infection, because I remember a follower on Instagram, because I put up stuff about being ill and what I'd be doing to get rid of illness. They're like, you're always, this is before like the mold diagnosis, you're always ill. I'm like, yeah, you're actually right. I am always getting sinus infections, and it probably doesn't help that I'm always being prescribed the same route of antibiotics until I had to cop on to go, hang on, this isn't what's actually causing the problem. And I've had one sinus infection since, and that was because I was exposed to mold. And I knew I was exposed to mold. So as soon as I was exposed to mold, I quickly started doing this sort of detox protocol of infrared sauna, some like binders like clays and charcoal, glutathione. And within like 15 hours of the symptoms of a sinus infection coming on where your face starts to swell and the sort of pain, all of a sudden all this sort of really thick yellow stuff started flushing out of my sinus. And that was basically giving the immune system that antioxidant debt. This is sort of where over the last while I've started to realize when you start to get this illness, when you start giving your body the defense that it needs, it will basically clean up what it needs to. And I avoided a full-blown sinus infection with that sort of protocol, knowing I was in a room where there was clear mold in a damaged building, and stupidly, but then knew that when the symptoms of a sinus infection started to come on, I was like, hang on, this isn't a sinus infection, this is mold exposure.
Right.
Put the protocol
and then you take
in
care
place.
of it with the antioxidant, with the antioxidant protocol as soon as possible. Then it only takes a couple of days, right, to get over that.
Exactly. And it's like, you know, you're looking at all these things in your environment, and you're like doing everything as possible to avoid like EMF radiation and, you know, pollutants and whatever else. And meanwhile, you've got this big hidden mold growth behind the concrete of your wall that you can't even smell or see. So it's, you know, it's one of those ones that I'm now like, when someone comes to me for consult and there's some like hidden issues, not to be like the mad like mold conspiracy theorist, but sort of like, do you live in a water damaged building? Oh yeah, there was a bit of mold growing on my window in the back room of my old house. It's sort of like, well, now
there you go. That's it. Yeah, look there first. Yeah, look there first. Yeah, I have the same thing. If you know you do consultations and the blood work parameters are actually quite good, but the symptoms don't really match that, it's either nicotine adenine dinucleotide deficiency, right, or an antioxidant deficiency, or something chronic like a mold toxicity or Lyme's disease, or some of these issues, celiacs, for example, something underlying that you don't really see right away, but it's better just to go through the ringer and spend the money to get that diagnosed, and then you can take affirmative action, and more often than not, you can fix it in a week once you know what's actually going on.
The root cause.
I saw him posting your Instagram about hair loss and nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and I think you and me are the only two who pieced it together. No, I'm serious, because I made it. I think I made a video about like post-Finasteride syndrome and how to kind of mitigate it and upregulate the 5-alpha reductase enzymes type 1, 2, and 3 with nicotinamide mononucleotide or nicotinamide riboside supplementation, because these enzymatic reactions are dependent on nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And look at the comment section, and it was on your post as well, right? People that come back later to report like, wait a minute, that fucking fixed it. It's so funny, right? That you and me kind of piece that together. So give me your insights. I want to know. I'll fill in afterwards.
So with me, obviously, we're starting to see a lot of like what sort of led me down this rabbit hole was a consult on post-Roaccutane syndrome, which is very sort of like, I guess, non-benign to 5-alpha reductase and also to aromatase inhibitor syndromes. And it was the whole thing of I took Roaccutane and now I have zero libido. And so they're like, what's going on here from a mechanistic perspective? And so then when you go down that rabbit hole, you see retinoids interfering with 5-alpha reductase activity and slowing 5-alpha reductase down completely. And then the next step from that was, well, let's look at the mechanism. I already knew sort of the mechanism of 5-alpha reductase and how it reduces testosterone, but let's actually look and piece how the enzyme works to make DHT. And you see that it needs the NAD cofactor with FMN, like aromatase. And if it doesn't have NAD, the enzyme's not going to work. So to me, it just was sort of logic of, if the enzyme's not working, let's give it the substrate that it needs. And then the argument is sort of like, oh, I've taken supplements before and it didn't improve. And it's sort of like, well, if there's that much oxidative stress in the body, like NAD is needed by like glucose 6-phosphate metabolism. Like if there's that much oxidative stress and you take like 500 milligrams of NAD or the ribosolamide version or NMN, whatever way you want to take, or even flush niacin, do you really think that small amount of NAD you make from taking a supplement is going to magically fix like a global enzyme deficiency?
No, right. Like, and it takes a while. I mean, when they talk about magnesium, right, they say it's the 300 metabolic processes, biological processes are dependent on magnesium, but everything is dependent on NAD+, literally everything. If you go to the list on Wikipedia, they tried to index that. It's over 10,000 enzymes that are dependent on NAD+ or NADP or NADPH, right? The phosphate, whether that's oxidized or not oxidized. So people have no understanding how far this simple supplementation protocol goes. And I noticed it because I started supplementing with NAD+ intravenously for the last 1.5 years. And everything has improved, right? That's why it's an anti-aging drug, because NAD+ levels already go down as you age. And guess what? When you take steroids, your NAD+ requirement goes up substantially, just like your glutathione requirement goes up substantially, because the oxidative stress and the enzymatic reactions. And I think a lot of people that experience post-Finasteride syndrome or have issues with the aromatase enzymes, right, because of the upregulation that comes along with NAD+ deficiency, right? Now your body starts to produce more aromatase enzymes to kind of offset that, because half of them are not even working. Right? And then suddenly, your NAD+ levels go up, and guess what? Aromatase galore. Your estradiol levels just shoot up.
And it was just sort of like, when we're figuring out complex biology, I can understand conventional medicine's viewpoint on post-Finasteride syndrome is that it's psychosomatic. And you can't argue that it's not psychosomatic in some instance, in that if you sort of hyper-focus on having no libido, you're going to have no libido. You're going to have no sexual confidence. So there is a level of psychosomatism that plays into the syndrome, but there is a biochemical answer to the syndrome also, as opposed to telling someone just man up, like, which is sort of some of the advice that's given of like, oh, I'll go see a clinical psychiatrist, and a clinical psychiatrist is prescribing antidepressants for your low libido because you're depressed.
Makes it even worse.
Exactly. So you're being funneled. You're being funneled into a classical medical system, not to get down that avenue. But it's sort of like, you know, we can put our thinking caps on here as biochemists or an interest in biology, and actually figure out what's gone wrong in response to either Accutane, finasteride, aromatase inhibitors, where they've used, you know, the third class generation aromatase inhibitors, and look at, you know, how you're going to keep that body happy and supported. And I mean, you then have to sort of look at, when you have people who have these things, we're starting to even see, you know, adaptogenic mushrooms are the sort of next thing that's under fire for causing mental instability. And I'm not arguing that adaptogenic mushrooms don't cause issues, because to be honest, if you look at half the adaptogens that people take every day, we have no clue how they work biochemically. You just see, oh, take ashwagandha. Some people, we see their adrenal output increase, and certain people we see a decrease, and we see cortisol drop. So we don't actually understand how, you know, for example, like ashwagandha, the withanolides, how they actually work biologically, except take it and see how you feel tends to be what my approach is with adaptogens, because it's different for each different person.
Right. And then in once in a while, you know, blue moon, you get somebody who experienced anhedonia and then goes on a rampage online that it's, you know, 100% the ashwagandha root extract's fault. But so many things can cause anhedonia or you know, libido issues. And in many cases, just multifactorial. Of course, you can pinpoint at one thing because that maybe pushed you over the edge, right? You were already at 99% bad, and now you went to 101%, and now everything is kind of broken. And it might have been the lion's mane or the ashwagandha root or the finasteride, for that matter. Right? But in many cases, there's an underlying health condition that is not diagnosed because you're deficient in so many things, the micronutrients, which contribute to enzymatic reactions. And it's usually more problematic. But I really liked that you made that Instagram post that came to the same conclusion as my video, because I know that it can save so many people so many problems if they just look at these underlying things and just go back to the basics of the biology. I think, a lot of people can save themselves a world of pain, you know, but they have to spend a little bit of extra money on the NMN or the NAD+, because it's not cheap.
And when you look at even the conversion process, obviously that the end part is NAD. You can derive it from nicotinamide or niacin, whatever form of vitamin B3 you want to. But again, 1,000 milligrams of flush niacin, it's not pretty to take, or even niacinamide. How much of that enzymatically at the end is getting you to NAD as it's being pushed down the pathways? So again, saying that supplements don't work, it can be a time issue, it can be a dose issue. You know, you can't say the validity to the science is incorrect, because you can basically prove, well, the enzyme works off this cofactor, and if you're not ingesting this cofactor in high amounts, or you've got all this underlying dysfunction, you can't rule out that being your root cause. You know, you can't even test for it in your blood. So it's sort of
and you don't know. Right, you don't know how far the deficiency goes. So like you mentioned in the beginning, if you think that 1,000 milligrams niacinamide is going to fix it, maybe after a year of taking it every day, right? And then maybe you want to take the fast track and actually go to an anti-aging clinic and just get 200 milligrams NAD+ administered. And then people complain about that feeling. Yeah, I did it this morning, so I know exactly what it feels like. It's not comfortable. It's literally injecting anxiety, right? That much antioxidants, especially if you pair that with glutathione and vitamin C in the amino acid drip, or in the amino drip, right? So it's very potent, but I think if you just go to the end stage and then get that addressed, I think you can save yourself so many issues. I mean, my quality of life has improved basically on all levels ever since I've started doing these IV administrations. Does it cost an arm and a leg? Absolutely, but it's worth it.
No, definitely. And I mean, you're starting to see that it's, you know, can you put a price on the quality of life if you're going round with anhedonia and you're feeling that sort of depressive nature. I mean, even to go back with my prep last year, when I got to like, it's about 4 weeks out, my wife turned around to me and said, you know what, you never smile. And you never sort of seem to laugh, or you never seem to find any enjoyment at family days out. And I said, you know what, you're actually right. And then during my prep I was taking, we've this product called the AM priming stack, and it's basically like what I took when I was a chemical engineer to just basically keep my emotions in check to any sort of fire that happened at work. You know, if a 3 million pound machine broke down, I was wasting, $250,000 every 5 minutes. I'm sort of like thinking, okay, how can I fix this, as opposed to getting pulled into all the emotionalities of someone shouting at you and trying to figure out how can I fix this as quick as possible. So we released that as a product, which is effectively like supposed to help adapt yourself to all levels of stress. But I can do such a good job of it that if you're taking it chronically, you'll get to a point where your emotions are just blunted. So you're just like, yeah, you're just like, yeah, whatever. Something's gone really bad on prep, or you're having like a really bad day. You're just like, yeah, whatever. You're just flat. That's the best way to explain it. And
oh my God,
that's, that was chronically taking that adaptogen stack of ashwagandha, holy basil, rhodiola, bacopa, periwinkle for like 8 to 9 weeks straight, from like probably 16 weeks out.
That will numb you out. Any phosphatidylserine in there to bring you down even further?
I was taking that at bedtime, which is like in the PM stack. So, on prep last year, I was like bulletproof mentally, like just nothing fazed me. But it was just sort of like a 4 weeks out. Morgan said to me one day after being at the beach or something, like, you just don't smile. Like, you're not enjoying yourself. I'm like, am I really not like looking like I'm enjoying myself? She's like, yeah, you're just like, you exist, but you don't have any emotion. I was like, okay, well, that's the end of that. And the AM priming came out quickly.
So you got the Trenbolone sandwich. You got the Trenbolone sandwich effect without being on the Trenbolone. That's amazing.
When we got to the end stage of prep last year, in terms of like even hopping on the train, there was like, I think we used 10 milligrams on training days only before training to try and stop. My body was basically at like 4% body fat. And I remember saying to Cal, like, this is the time for it to go in. Like, there was no exogenous T3, there was nothing else. My metabolism was just blazing. I was like, a small little bit on training days, about 2 hours before training, to make sure that one, strength is being preserved, but also that sort of cortisol, the cortisol metabolism is kept under control. And like, I remember explaining to people, like, they're asking, like, oh, how much were you taking? I was like, at the end, for like the last 4 weeks, 40 milligrams of Tren A. And they're like every like second day? No, that was like per week. They're like looking at you going like, and you don't need that much, when you've got the rest of it set up correctly. You're literally using this to make sure that you don't turn into a skeleton.
Exactly. Hey, hold that thought. I got to go to the bathroom real quick. 1 second. Okay. So you were basically on 40 milligrams Trenbolone acetate per week. And, towards the end of prep, I mean, it's usually enough to kind of prevent the cannibalism, right? And prevent you from going flat and that kind of stuff. Did you notice that the Trenbolone sandwich, or going on Trenbolone, did it mess with your mind after being on this, stack of ashwagandha root extract and everything that made you a little bit insensitive, right, to outside stressors?
No, I think after, so that was 4 weeks out from the first show, and then obviously from the first show to the Irish Nationals, I think it was four more weeks or 5 weeks from the warm-up show to the Irish. So we obviously done a warm-up show to sort of get used to being back on stage after 5 years. The sort of anhedonia from like the adaptogen stack had sort of wore off by say week 5, week 6. I started to notice that, I was starting to enjoy things a bit better on like this sort of like Sunday family day. Aside from being like fatigued, like physically, I was pretty much like not fatigued mentally. So definitely when that went in, there was no sort of sudden change. My sleep was absolutely perfect. I mean, that was one thing last year on prep, between Callum taking care of nutrition and sort of liaising on sort of the stack, and then Aaron who took care of my training. like Aaron really changed my paradigm to prep, like on its head.
All
like for the whole
which Aaron is this?
Aaron Casely, so he's known as Mofo Body Mechanic on Instagram.
Right. Yeah.
He completely changed my paradigm to how you adopt like training principles to prep. Like the whole of prep last year, I done no sets to failure. Like pretty much my training was either 3 rear or 2 rear, so 3 reps in reserve or 2 reps in reserve. But it was really like strict tempo-based training. So that was sort of how I knew when I was approaching like 3 reps in reserve or 2 reps in reserve, by being strict with the tempo.
Right. And the tempo goes down, and then you know that you're kind of, pushing towards the end of the set. Yeah.
You're hitting the end of the set. So it might have been like a set of 8 to 12 at 3 reps in reserve, but it didn't really matter if you got to 12, and that was when you had 3 reps in reserve. It was sort of like you had this gauge of when your tempo of like 2 seconds down, 1 second hold, 2 seconds up, 1 second hold, being really strict to that time, like counting it with each rep. When that cadence of being able to control the weight to that tempo either slowed down or became too hard, then you sort of knew, okay, I'm getting into the reps now where you have to really work hard to maintain the tempo. And so like we done no training. I think I had 1 week where he said to me, okay, let's go to 0 to 1 rear. And this was like at like 16 weeks out. And from then on in, it was all like 3 reps in reserve. So my sleep was perfect. My appetite was perfect because I was never chasing recovery. And like Aaron's whole philosophy to me was prep is about how well you can recover, not how well you can lose fat. If you can recover optimally each day from your training, from your sort of deficit, from your steps, from sort of small bit of cardio, your body will have no choice but to lose body fat because there's going to be no central nervous system stress. Your sleep is going to be unaffected. Like I remember last year, I'd go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up at 5 a.m., like 7 hours sleep undisturbed, and sort of, never had any of the sort of androgen-induced insomnia or any sort of elevated heart rate where you're trying to fall asleep, but your body's that wired but tired that you don't fall asleep. I had known it. Like my prep, when we got to the end, I could have maintained that sort of prep as a lifestyle because the recovery was taken care of. The nutrition was at an adequate level. You never had issues of like, even when I went to train, not once during prep last year did I like sit outside the gym in my car and go, F this, I'm not going in today. Or like worry, look at my logbook and go, oh, I have to match these numbers today. Oh God, help me. It was sort of like you went in, go.
I think Dorian Yates is now smashing his head against the keyboard because he knows it's like, dude, this is not the way to train. But he also secretly wishes that he did something similar because, like, I'm sure your mood and your overall cognition was 10 times better during this prep than previous preps. And I'm noticing the same thing right now, right? I'm noticing the same thing right now. The previous cycle that I did, I tried to keep like 1 or 2 reps in reserve, maybe 1 or 2 sets to failure per workout. And now I'm getting back into the gym and I'm keeping 2 or 3 reps in reserves. And everything in life is better. You don't have this perpetual rain cloud over your head. And the weird thing is like we think we need to train this way to deal with our anger, especially when we're younger. I need to vent all of this rage that I have. But it's these sets to failure that actually keeps that alive. And if you ease back, you realize like, wait a minute, I'm in a much better place mentally and emotionally and productivity wise, but I'm still just as big. If anything, you're a little bit fuller because you don't have this, crazy muscle damage that you potentiate with these extra reps just grinding through your teeth, And
that was pretty much like when Aaron took over, like that off season when we spoke last year. He even said to me, he's like, right, you're never going to try into mechanical failure. He said, at best, we'll do a cyclical approach where like you'll do like undulating periodization where you'll do 3 reps in reserve 1 week, then the next week 2. And then if you're feeling it, let's go to 1 rep in reserve and really tap into those high threshold units. But he said it's always going to be dependent on what your body's dictating on how far you're going to push that recovery. There's no point like if your HRV is mashed, just going, oh, well, let's beat the logbook today because that's what we do. That I'm not against progressive overload. I've done it for so many years, but it led to so many issues, like nearly paralyzed myself. You've probably seen the video with the RDLs where literally I had two torn hamstrings that I had no idea about, and then I went down with 220 kilo RDL and came up, and I just felt this ping, and my back literally was like this.
Yeah, I
that,
see. I've seen it. Yeah,
you're chasing after a logbook, thinking that you have to beat this number, but that's not actually what is really generating the tension for you to build effective muscle tissue. So I do sit in the camp of there is an element of progressive overload, but there's also that element that you can incorporate that into like reps and reserve based training where you are still increasing your load. So there's no doubt that you have to keep increasing your load, but it doesn't come at the sacrifice of tempo, and it doesn't come at the sacrifice of recovery. Right. Whereas before, like I'd hack squat like 9 plates aside and literally just bounce out of it, like get really, really angry.
Reps at all costs. Right?
Exactly.
And this is I still see this going on Instagram now. They say people, I follow progressive overload. This is the only way to train. They do an exercise and they pause, and the weights go up and they pause longer. So they have now basically 6 reps, but all max out attempts, like a power lifter. And in between is literally 1 minute on the machine, just waiting before they're next. I got 6 reps, but they're not continuous, and the form got worse on every rep. So nowadays, of course, I'm not as big as these guys, so I'll be the first one to say that, right? I'm not an gram of Tren either, so maybe that doesn't help. But
you're just touched on a very valuable point there. You're masking your recovery with more drugs. So you then dial back the drugs and increase recovery, and you need less drugs to grow more. So, there's the valuable lesson here of, are you compensating for your really bad recovery with more drugs? Because the drugs are making up for that lack of recovery from your overzealous training.
Plus your organs at one point, they're literally going to fall out of your butt cheeks and then just run away from that kind of lifestyle. Like, no, out, we quit.
Yeah.
And they're off.
I mean, someone asked me about prep, and obviously with retirement, and when you sort of fulfill that goal and you don't have another goal, like I remember thinking after finishing competing, I'd compete again. And then I had to sort of ask myself, am I competing for myself, or am I competing to prove to others that I can do it again? And when the answer became I was doing it to prove other people, then it was instantly, well, you're not doing it for yourself anymore. So no, that decision to compete again goes out the window, because you're just doing it to prove other people wrong.
But I think half of the competitors have a huge chip on their shoulders and actually compete for that very reason.
Yeah.
And they want to prove other people wrong.
And you can get sucked into it. I mean, I knew, like, when I was even an amateur in Ireland, I was getting always top 6 finishes, but I was always falling short. And like last year was sort of like, it's now or never to prove that you can do it. And obviously afterwards you sort of look back at it and go, that prep was so easy, I'd do it again. And that in theory, it was so easy getting down to that level of body fat and holding it with having that recovery obviously mastered and being, diligent with having your recovery ticked off each day, that when you sort of view, let's prep again, and when the answer is not for yourself, then just walk away. And I mean, that's if anyone's listening to this, if you're a competitor, really ask yourself and be really honest with yourself of why you're competing. And if it's for social proof or social validation, it's really not worth it. You're never.
It's also not necessary. Well,
exactly.
I mean, I'll be the first one to say that and prove that it's not necessary, because now I got one of the biggest educational platforms on YouTube, right? I got 90,000 subscribers, and right now I'm going to say that I never competed. So a lot of people are already turning off, right? Oh, you never competed. You shouldn't know what he's talking about. But I still, got my word out there, and I still get, a warm welcome into the fitness industry, even though from a competitive scene, I'm basically a nobody. Still, and now I'm going on larger podcasts. I'm going to go to the Swiss convention, in Ohio, and then I'll be, part of panels that are, for very established athletes. But still, you don't have to compete to make your mark in the fitness industry. You just have to contribute something of value, right? And I contribute my information and knowledge. And other people can contribute their physique and be very inspiring, like Joel Stedix. I mean, he did compete twice, but he inspired millions just to get into the gym with, his crazy physique, right? So I think a lot of people, they're looking for the social validation through competing, but it's really not required.
No,
it really isn't.
And I mean,
you know, and
it was just as even like the honest question to my wife was, you know, no one gives a shit how I look like visually other than myself. The photos are brilliant to have where you can prove this is what I look like, but no one sort of views me for my physique. So I'm only validating that physique for myself as opposed to validating it for other people's opinions. And that once sort of competing again became a question of I wanted to prove to people I could win and keep winning. It was like, you're not even trying to prove it to yourself anymore that you can win. No. It's you're proving it to other people. It's time to walk away. And that was the right decision.
Right. And I agree. I think if you can maintain once in a while, you know, like a 6 weeks out physique for a show, to kind of show that you practice what you preach, which a lot of educators, they preach a lot, but they don't practice. Not naming any names. But like at least you show up like looking good and your blood work is good and you have a great physique for, you know, moderate dosages. And I try to do the same. Like once in a while, you got to show that you mean business, you know, but that doesn't mean you have to step on stage at the end process. Like my wife, for example, she was a competitor, right? She competed 17 times, never, ever placed out of the top 3. Never. 3 world championships, 3 Asian championships, 1 Southeast Asia, and 1 Mr. Thailand, right? The regionals. Won everything. And everything else, she was 2nd or 3rd. Now she's been retired for 4 to 5 years, just enjoying her life as a housewife, supporting my YouTube channel. And nobody remembers. Nobody remembers.
And that's
it's
the
rough.
thing.
Let me add to this one thing. Let me add. When you go to the muscle factory in Pattaya or in Bangkok, all the trophies that are there, right? We put the trophies in the gym. That's normal courtesy if you compete, right? You put the trophies there. All the best trophies are hers, and nobody cares. It's sad, right?
It's sad. It's sad. And I had the same conversation with someone of like, when I was starting bodybuilding in my like early 20s, when I was 23, 24, my first sort of competitive season in Ireland, all the like really inspiring Mr. Irelands from them, no one knows who they are. If I went into a gym today and said, oh, do you remember X, Y, and Z? Oh, who's that? Oh, well, he won Mr. Ireland in 2011. Having a clue. And it's sad that, you know, people don't know that heritage of the guys that came before you. But the other side of it is you have to realize that you're just going to be another name. So no one's going to care that I won classic bodybuilding class in 2022 in like 5 years time. It'd be sort of like, you know, there's been 5 other champions. So, you know, you have to realize that if you're going to do this, you do it for yourself and you do it for your own validation as opposed to other people's. And more so, you know, even with family, that like last year, that was more so what drove me to do the business, as to speak, was I want to finish this to get out of this sport for my, you know, for my kids and be able to devote my time as much as I did to bodybuilding and training and eating my meals, devote that time now to my sons, that I'm not looking at the clock, not worried about having to train. Like if I don't train a day, in the past I would get wound up. I'm not going to lie. You'd be sort of like, oh, today was a wasted day. I didn't get to train. Whereas now if I don't get to train like on holiday, you just sort of like, yeah, well, the gym's going to be there tomorrow. You know, I ate healthy today. I've taken my supplements. You've done X, Y, and Z. Training is such a small part to the equation that you can always go tomorrow. And
no, you know, exactly. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
That mentality shift of being a competitor to post-competitor life, you almost do need to have some sort of purpose that's pulling you away from competing and be just as serious to that new purpose as you were when you were a competitor.
I think business. I think for most of us, we kind of transition into business. You see it with a lot of the guys that I recently did podcasts with. Instead of doing this hardcore bodybuilding lifestyle for competing, they just move into business and they're super successful, right? They're kicking ass and they're on social media and they're promoting their whatever product or service that they offer. I mean, I'm doing the same. I'm not going to lie about it. I think it's much more fulfilling because, you know, being successful through another endeavor where you're actually making money, this also allows you to take care of your family 10 times better than bodybuilding, where you're always distant. It's always about you, and every little last bit of money that you have, you sink into another kit of growth hormone. And I think that's the wrong approach in the long run, right? Maybe in the short run, when you're young and single and like you really want to go pro and that kind of stuff, right? Everybody wants to go pro nowadays. And if you can make it, good on you, because at the top you can make a fuckload of money. Let's be honest. I mean, look at Chris Bumstead and Jay Cutler and all these guys. So if you can capitalize on it, perfect. But if you're not that inclined, I think if you just focus this effort on business, you can accomplish so much more for yourself and the family, that a holiday to Mauritius or Japan or, America, that's just an afterthought, the finances that are involved with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's more so, again, even with like the freedom now with moving into even supplement needs of like taking a 3-week vacation of just switching off and keeping an eye on small ticking over things, but being able to really just go, right, 3 weeks of pretty much no work other than maybe half an hour on the laptop in the morning time drinking a coffee, that you can have that freedom to switch off and tell people like, leave me alone for 3 weeks.
It's tough though. It's tough because guys like us were always in demand. I remember last time I went on holiday, I still had one consultation every day, but in the morning, just before I went out. Because otherwise it just, it kind of, consolidates, and then by the time you get back you have like 6 hours of consultations per day. It's too much. That's what happens when you're very popular on social media. But it's good to kind of go ahead.
I was going to say, with us, we just, I said to my wife, other than checking in on supplement needs, that was it. I'd been no consults. I had one coaching client that was doing the NABA World Championships. He checked in with me. But other than that, just pretty much my day revolved around waking up, drinking coffee, and then being pulled into the Villa pool at like 8:15 in the morning for 2 hours.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, dude. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm going to join you. I think hopefully we'll have some good news at the end of the year, because my fertility parameters came back almost flawlessly. 500 million semen or sperm per ejaculate. Yeah, it's crazy, right? And the morphology is around 12%, and the motility was close to 40 or high, no, 70 something. So, yeah, insane numbers. And so we're basically ready to conceive finally. And then I think a couple months down the line, we should have some good news. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
And it's time also.
It's and that then in terms of like even your time management, when something like that comes along, your value of time will completely change as well, because you start to view every moment away from your kids as sort of time lost, really.
Right. Yeah, that's what everybody told me. So once you have kids, 10 minutes at the gym extra, forget about it. So everybody in the gym is going to think I'm a dickhead, because I'll be like, yeah, no questions. Let's schedule a consultation. I'm out the door.
and you're speaking very truly. Like it's even your sort of viewpoint in life. Like even with prep last year, I remember like eating my last meal some nights and thinking like, what am I doing here? Like you're sort of what your mortality completely changes when you become a father. Your mortality, you question everything of like, what happened if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning? As crazy as it sounds, you're just like thinking, is the choices I'm doing today serving tomorrow and the future of those sort of dependents?
Right. Yeah, you got to maximize your time. I mean, especially recently, I'm very faced with my own mortality, since there's so many people in the fitness industry dying. So I got my will already, and I'll update it every month. I even got a video ready for the guys in case I died. Then I can just post it, speak beyond the grave. I'll update that one every 6 months, also just in case, right? But I do realize that every day you got to kind of maximize everything, because you never know when it's taken away from you. And especially when you have kids. I mean, you don't want to leave them kind of unfathered prematurely. So I think going forward, my experimentation phase is kind of behind me, because I've done so many experiments over the last years to the enjoyment of the fitness industry. They love it when I do experiments, but I think it's no longer a good idea to do that, because I'm literally using my body as a guinea pig.
And it's, I really enjoyed looking at what you can sort of achieve with, certain peptides or anything like that. I think probably you'll still view experimentation from a longevity perspective of how can I actually now stay alive until I'm 90, as opposed to how big can I get. So you see there's a complete paradigm shift in your mentality of I'm still going to look really lean and, you know, muscular, but I'm going to also look at the aspects of how can I live until I'm 70. Like I remember saying to Morgan jokingly, if I can have this sort of physique that I have now at 35 when I'm 70, you know, job done.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Like even now, I've been off cycle for 6 months, right? But I'm still, you know, decently strong and heavy and that kind of stuff. And I think if I just maintain this 95 kilos, I think that's more. And I know I only need, you know, half an AMPA test and an AMPA Primo to get it done. And that's, I mean, I don't see myself not running that indefinitely based on my blood work parameters, but, you know, doing a crazy cycle with 2 grams a test. And even though I fantasize about these things sometimes, because it's the legendary training that comes along with that. But, you know, I mean, for that 1.5 hours in the gym, is it really worth it? You know, I mean, I'm turning 40 this year, and I'm sure once we have kids and I see them born, and then I'm like, yeah, whatever. You know. Yeah,
you completely, like, one changes your perspective, and then 2 is just like, okay, well, now things have completely changed. And again, that was one of the reasons why I chose to quit my job to go to Supplement Needs was, again, the luxury of being at home, seeing the boys grow. You know, the first year when Callum was born, I spent half the year away, like physically away, working in Dublin, which is like a 3-hour drive. So at the end of that year, before all the craziness, when you added up the time, I was away either 3 or 4 days per week for his first year of life to his first birthday. So you sort of then view it that, you know, I missed 6 months of being in person with him, seeing him every day on video call, which is amazing that we have that technology now. But being away from him physically for that much time, even though it was only half a week every week, when you go back and look at it, you know, you've missed half of the first year in person. And that to me was just like, you know what? The ability to work from home and be present and see all these precious memories is to me a huge value, because eventually you're going to get to a point like our first son, Callum. He's starting his first year of primary school this year, so he's going to be gone from 9 until 2 p.m. Monday to Friday now. So you lose that time when he goes to primary education. You lose that time with him. So to me, in my mind, I wanted to make up as much time as possible in person before he went and effectively is out of the house for half the day.
Right. So your working hours are basically going to be from 9 to 2, and then you have to get your workout in during this time as well. So that's what I figured, right? First 3 years, you have like all the time together with your kids. And then once they start going to primary school and then, you know, the middle school and that kind of stuff, you actually gain a little bit of hours during the day, because then you have the green light to spend time on work or going to the gym or that kind of stuff. So that's ultimately where I want to be. Just a couple hours per day, you know. And I, you know, to be fair, I can basically retire if I wanted to, but I still enjoy doing the YouTube videos. So by the time I have kids, I'm really dialing back my workload, because this is one of the reasons why we wanted to wait so long, you know, until we're 40 and financially secure enough to kind of say, okay, today I'm not going to work. And if that turns into a week of not working, okay, fine.
And you know, and it's given a good value then to like your children of being present all the time, and in that, you know, that was another big thing with us in discussing like childcare. So Morgan has her own business, her own clinic, and so on a Wednesday and Thursday, the 2 boys spend from 9 till 6 in daycare. So on a Wednesday and Thursday, Morgan runs her clinic from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so I get 9 till 6 undisturbed. So if I've got a lot of work, Wednesday and Thursday, sort of like, that's it, no gym. It's literally as soon as they go into creche till I collect them from creche, it's just as much work as I can cram into those 2 days. Right. And then I can ease off the gas then at the weekend, do nothing. Friday, you know, take care of some jobs or supplement needs, but I can make sure that on those 2 days when there's no distractions, those are the sort of workflow days to capitalize on that being out of the house. So it'd be the same when you go to primary school. You've got now 5 days, and so you sort of see the first 4 years are really vital of getting to see every last little bit, because beyond that sort of 4th year, they're in primary school for 9 months of the year. So again, you lose 5 days where you don't see them for quite a bit of time, and it's sad, but it's also liberating. But it's sad in that you see how quickly time passes as well.
No, I know. Like for them, it goes super fast. I remember when I was a young kid, and then you realize that you have so many hours in the day, right? And then I have to go to bed, and it felt like a lifetime. You know, for me now, you know, it feels like, oh, I have to go to bed again. And the next day, I'm done already. And don't get me wrong, like I get a ton of work done during the day. I mean, now it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I go to bed maybe 2 hours from now, and I got so much work done today that as a kid you can't really fathom it. But literally, I realized before I go to bed, like, wait, my day is done already. So your time perspective really changes as you get older. But I am looking forward to that three-year down period and then slowly ramping up the work. What I do see with a lot of bodybuilders when their kids are like 10, 12, 15 years old, that they start picking it up again because their kids are now self-sufficient. They're self-reliant. And they're like, you know what? I remember this bodybuilding thing that I really, really loved that I put on the back burner for so many years. Now it's my time again to to kick some ass in the gym. And I think a lot of guys actually get some longevity because of this reason, because they don't have this wear and tear on the organs, on the joints, on, their lifestyle and that kind of stuff. So they get like a second phase of bodybuilding in maybe their 50s. And then they really end up looking good. And they're also revitalized because they took such a long time off. Paul Burnett, for example, right? He just got back into bodybuilding and he's making all the gains, but he basically took off from bodybuilding because he wanted to focus on his kids and focus on his business. And then he looked like a normal Joe Blow during that time. I mean, if you see the before and after pictures, it's quite dramatic. But it's good to see him having kind of, and Justin Harris, same thing, right? They kind of took a step back and now they're back and kicking ass. It's funny to see. Yeah. So there is hope for guys like us.
Definitely. I mean, someone said to me recently, oh, well, you can go back and compete as a master at some point if you want. But again, it comes back to you have to want to compete for yourself as opposed to, you're a 50-year-old ex-Mr. Ireland. I'm going back to prove a point. You almost, again, it has to be a self-motivated goal to go back and compete like that. But yeah, definitely, like I said to you, when I sort of finished, I said to Morgan, if I can maintain the sort of physique I have now, that's lean, that's sort of sitting at mid 90 kilos, with minimal, if anything, I'll be happy, and that's sort of the goal here now moving forward of is, gone are the days of going into the gym and smashing, like, let's see how heavy I can lift. It's almost going in, let's move my body, let's contract some muscles and let's gain the metabolic benefits from training now, as opposed to let's go in and try and maximize every training session for tissue.
Yeah, but I think your overall quality of life is now 10 times better because you don't destroy yourself in that 1 hour in the gym. And then the other 23 hours, you can actually accomplish something. Because this is what was my main issue when I was hardcore bodybuilding at, 120 kilos. It's just you give everything of your life into the 1.5 hours that you're in the gym, and then everything else is kind of lackluster. You're tired, you're moody, hungry, unproductive, but you don't miss any meals, you don't miss any injections. Of course not, right? That's the bodybuilding life. So I'm surprised to see that some of these IFBB pros now that are doing the Olympia level competition, right? They literally sink everything into it, but they still accomplish quite a bit outside of the sport. Right? So that's good to see, but it seems that it's a rarity. And of course, they got great coaches and great financial backing that it helps. But it's most of the guys I see, that give up everything for bodybuilding, and 10 years later, they have nothing to show for it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's sort of like, again, if you're an amateur and you're chasing after getting professional status, the amount of finance you're gonna have to sink into chasing after a pro card, if you're not like one of the lucky 5%, that's gonna be you know, a successful pro immediately, you sort of have to reevaluate. Would you be better off putting all that time investment into something more so building your own brand as opposed to trying to achieve a status for the sake of saying you're an IFBB pro? It's lost its meaning a little bit, and how not achievable it is, but how accessible it's become. That it's no longer sort of a rite of passage of being the best of the best. It's almost like who's turned up on the day and who's been rewarded. That being an IFBB pro doesn't carry the same financial weight.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember.
You know, add to that all the kids who are on social media who have 10 times bigger followings that they're engaged with way better, and their revenue streams. I mean, I see the sales figures from some of these supplements companies, and these kids who have never competed, who've got huge followings, they turn over pre-workout like cocaine.
Yeah, it's scary.
The amount, no, they make like $60,000 to $100,000 a month just on sales, and no IFBB pro generates that. None of them. You know, maybe Jay Cutler and Chris Bumstead, but most of these pros, they don't turn it over. The amount of sales that these social media influencers do, you know, and their expenses are 10 times higher.
I think the legacy contracts of like £10,000-15,000 or dollars per month, like salary contracts, are gone. It's gone. You know, being within that sort of supplement industry, a lot of it is influencer marketing now, which is tactful on the company's perspective, but it's no longer sort of, before you became an IFBB pro, you picked up a big contract with one of the big US manufacturing companies, and that was you sort of settling that you got your wage, you done your photo shoots, you were in the magazines, you were at some of the expos promoting supplements that you probably didn't take, and you got a nice big paycheck at the end of the month, and allowed you to compete at a couple of big competitions a year. But that was sort of how the industry moved, like in the mid 2000s. And then obviously with social media in the last 5 or 6 years, once you've got a good following, a good social proof, good marketing capability, you can generate quite a lot of money, like you've said there, with certain supplement brands, where it might not be the most efficacious product, but the marketing buys people into it, and they earn a good wage from it.
And they have worldwide coverage, you know, which helps a lot also, because social media is worldwide, and not just America, not just the UK, not just Australia. If you have worldwide coverage for a supplement brand, you know, and you have an audience of a couple social media influencers that you know service the entire world, you can make a lot of sales, you know, and of course, cost and marketing and all that stuff. I mean, it's with every product, right? That goes on with it. But I think a lot of bodybuilders are kind of overlooking that. And I see some of them really adopt the social media life, which is good. Like, you know, Martin Fitzwater? It's one of the new IFBB pros, younger guys.
Yeah. I know the name,
So he produces his shorts, and he does, you know, a lot of content. And of course, Nick Walker and you know, Derek Lunsford, all these guys that produce a ton of content. And trust me, their sales are far outshining any prize money or actual supplement sponsorship deal that they get, right? Because they're active on social media.
Yeah.
So I wonder how many like freaky genetic individuals that could be phenomenal pros in the back end of the 90s and the 2000s, right, with a good supplement sponsorship, and they would just, you know, go balls to the wall for bodybuilding. How many of those guys are we now losing to social media influencer status because they can do 10 times better for half the work, right? From a bodybuilding perspective, of course, you know, making pictures and, you know, videos that takes hours out of the day as well. It's not just, let's make a video and throw it online. It's not that simple, unfortunately. I wish I'd have a lot more content if it was.
It's very, very selective, and even in terms of like marketing and imagery, like that's one thing now that we're starting to view, even as a supplement company with supplement needs, that we started as a bodybuilding company, and everything I formulated hasn't just been for bodybuilders, but the bodybuilding demographic was obviously first and foremost sort of the primary care aspect of what I wanted to introduce, like the heart stack, liver stack. And if you're going to do these drugs, these are the mechanisms to disease, and these supplements might offset it. But we're now starting to, you know, branch into general population and branch into longevity. You know, people who are really into like biohacking and seeing that there is a way to sort of extend quality of life beyond pharmaceutical drugs, that supplements can play into it. So even our sort of brand imagery is slowly changing, and that bodybuilders will always be at the forefront of why I started formulating these things, but also for them to realize that Heart Stack is just as good for their parents or for their aunties and uncles as it is for a bodybuilder, because they were never designed just for bodybuilders.
And I think because you and me were both coming from a bodybuilding background, so that's kind of where you started. But I saw the progression of my YouTube channel and things I talk about on the YouTube channel. It's so much more diversified, because the bodybuilding, the core audience, is actually very small. And let's be honest, most of the bodybuilders are not financially secure because they spend all their money on drugs. So they don't have money for blood work or supplements or consultations or coaching even. So you have to, as an educator, you kind of have to diversify and kind of branch out to all these other demographics where people are maybe a little bit more financially secure because they don't spend so much money on PEDs and they have some disposable income for other stuff, right? And then you realize that, wait a minute, there's so many people out there who could benefit from the information that we gained from bodybuilding, but they're not necessarily bodybuilders. And I think that's why my YouTube channel has been growing more. And of course, Derek from More Place More Dates is always hammering into me, like, the audience is not just bodybuilders, Steve. It's just people interested in fitness. And if you make it a little bit more accessible to people who are interested in fitness, you can grow 10 times better. And I'm sure supplement needs will see something similar once you start branching off to general health. It's, you can literally 10x, your revenue.
Yeah, you've just nailed on your head that you almost see that the hardcore supplement users are the ones who have disposable income versus not to like put like stereotypes, but you will find most bodybuilders will look at what's the cheapest sort of supplements that I can take to sort of tick off the box, as opposed to being the most health conscious, as to speak.
Right.
And the ones then that are sort of tapped into it and then view that being a little more premium with their sort of budget in terms of longevity pays off better than going for like the cheapest thing that they can find on like Amazon or Google. That you almost you bring them across from that sort of bare necessity mentality to, well, this is actually a necessity for longevity, because at the end of the day, when you finish bodybuilding, you don't want to have X, Y, and Z health problems or be having to then chase after diagnosis for, dyslipidemia or this, that, and the other, that you could be proactive when you're in your career with supplements. So I think, you are always going to have a core audience, and for me that is obviously with bodybuilding and PEDs and getting guys to realize that. But the other side of it, like you said, is trying to get those guys then to maybe say to their parents or to their aunties and uncles or their whatever nephews,
take some TRT. Dad, take some TRT.
But you know what, and that is quite a valuable chat. Like, I was speaking to someone recently, and they were only speaking about their dad, and the dad was feeling a little run down, and then they had the bloods done, and the total test was at 8. And they were trying to explain to their dad that, if you optimize your testosterone level to like even 16 or 18, so you're pretty much doubling your natural level with some TRT, your quality of life will exponentially increase. Your risk to disease will probably be balanced in that you're offsetting metabolic diseases, whilst also potentially skewing your lipid panel ever so slightly. But you sort of have this sort of seesaw where it's probably balanced, but there's more longevity to be gained from it as opposed to disease.
Plus it kind of forces you to eat better. So in that sense, you're like, wait a minute, if you take out all the shitty food that makes you feel so shitty, then your lipids on TRT will improve as well. I've had this discussion with my dad, who's become a lot more health conscious after having some medical conditions. But he didn't want anything to do with it. So at least he's eating better, so that helps. And he's taking some over-the-counter supplements. So he's really tuned into the taurine and the the glycine and NAC, right, and all that stuff. And I think eventually he'll come over for TRT, but maybe that's further down the line. But I know a lot of bodybuilders, are of our age. They got their parents on TRT, or at least a dad, and maybe the mother on some sort of DHEA protocol. And then they realize, like, oh man, it's like my parents are like 20 years younger, energy wise and mentality wise, because they have so much more energy.
Yeah, and I mean, you can have the conversation of, as you're aging, you don't want to see a decline in quality. Why would you want to see a decline in quality in terms of I guess geriatric diseases or like even frailty onset? Like, why would you want to lose the quality of life that you have? Like, imagine extending your 50s into your 80s, basically. So there's no need for it to age with what we have access to now in terms of not being able to keep the body in a healthy state. And I even have these conversations with my own parents. So it's it's all about what we sort of have learned from bodybuilding. Hopefully it's being passed over to general population, and that, telling bodybuilders, you take PDs, you're going to suffer LDL oxidation. Oh, well, hang on, mom and dad, you're on statins, but did you know LDL oxidation is actually what is probably the primary driver to the plaque? So even taking your statin, it's decreasing your LDL production by 50%, but you're still oxidizing all that LDL you're making.
Yeah.
So,
so you need some antioxidants and what is it, the stuff to help the arteries kind of stay smooth, or the walls of the arteries, so that they don't have the foam cells of the LDL, they can't get stuck to form actual plaque. Yeah, I think if you start, and you can accomplish that with fish oil and vitamin E, vitamin C for endothelial function. It's funny how all that information can kind of transcend into general population. And what I noticed when I went to the Mr. Olympia last year is that a lot of people that approached me, they're not necessarily bodybuilders. They're more, they take from bodybuilding in a fitness space, but they just want to feel good, look good, have more energy. And I think if you start branching out to that demographic, then the success is limitless, as we've seen from Derek. I mean, he branched out quite a bit, and now he's one of the biggest, fitness channels, that still provides quality information, not just the lifestyle channels, because I know that's just, people lying about their drug use, obviously. All these 2 million, 4 million subscriber channels that say that they're natural, but they're not. And at least Derek provides some value. It's it's an old side tangent, but I do think I think if you're going that direction with supplement needs and also your own content, on your website or on Instagram, I think the sky's the limit. As long as you stay true to yourself and that don't start selling snake oil.
Well, that's it. Well, that's one thing that I will never ever do. And that you even had a piece of content about like natural test boosters. That is one product that I am adamant I will never create, ever.
Really?
And that is based off the science. Like, you could play on someone's emotion and create a natural test booster with all the natural test boosting herbs that we can find online. And I mean, it's not to say that they don't work, but what I try and get guys to understand is, for you to increase your testosterone level, you have to have more either luteinizing hormone in your body or more luteinizing hormone receptor interactions in your Leydig cell. There's no two ways about how you're making more testosterone. How certain natural supplements play into being a test booster is that you make about 5% testosterone from DHEA in your adrenals. You might upregulate that 17-hydroxysteroid pathway to make more testosterone in your adrenals, and then all of a sudden, 3% increase in total testosterone. Well, that just came from your adrenals, and as soon as you stop taking the supplement, it's going to drop. And that's, I would love for us to have something natural that would endogenously, you can sort of look at maybe natural aromatase inhibiting herbs, lowering serum estradiol levels, so that would in theory raise your total testosterone from lower aromatization, but also because that lower aromatization is going to allow the hypothalamus to make more gonadotropin releasing hormone and make more LH as a consequence. But there's no real herb, there's nothing that really interacts with the LH receptor from a herb perspective.
Fidosia agressus.
Right. We've seen that in rats. So we're sort of taking rat data and going,
we're extrapolating, right?
You know?
Yeah. I think a test booster in many cases wide. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say when I done my sort of PCT of off everything and obviously my natural test level being hypogonadal at 8, I tried everything and I done all blood work and nothing made a dent in that LH value sitting at 3.4 and my TT staying at 8.1 nanomole. I tried everything. You can name anything and I just researched and I just started taking it during that period. And eventually nothing was proving to be working during that 8-month off period. And I eventually was like, you know what? All this is just marketing hype. I put that to bed. I'm not saying that N equals 1, but I'm fairly certain that, you know, quite a lot of it doesn't really do what it's supposed to be doing other than either interact at the adrenals. Fidosia was one that I didn't try. Now I'm going to put my hand up and say I didn't try that, so I can't argue whether it works or doesn't work from what I've done my own blood work. But I like snake oil, I just couldn't play on someone's emotion of take 4 caps and you're going to see this increase in testosterone.
I think the main reason why a lot of these testosterone boosters work is because of a micronutrient deficiency. Right? A lot of people get themselves androgen deficient because they're not taking care of themselves. So you're basically getting a testicular function multivitamin with zinc and selenium and boron and taurine and carnitine and vitamin E, right? All the antioxidants and then of course ashwagandha root extract, Fidosia agressus, and Tongkat Ali contribute a little bit on top of that. I think if people already eat well and they get all their micronutrients in a low oxidative state, and they, you know, assuming they don't have a varicocele, right, which impairs the blood flow to the testicles, which is more undiagnosed than people realize, because I do a lot of these consultations.
And that's what I see with even fertility. I see guys who will do fertility protocols with HMG, with TRT or recombinant FSH, and we get to week 10 to week 12 and we do a sperm analysis and there's nothing and they're panicking. And I'm like, okay, well, let's deduce from this. Your FSH is sitting at 1.3 on your blood work. So the HMG is real because we're detecting it in your serum as FSH.
Right.
How about we go and get a testicular ultrasound? What's that going to show? Well, for one thing, there's probably a varicocele, so the FSH is going nowhere. It's not going to your testicle.
Exactly.
You know,
and then they have to go through the ringer because it's one of the most uncomfortable ultrasounds you have to do unless you get a really hot sonographer. But yeah, good luck. It never turns out that, dude, I had a guy. I'd done it twice. I got a guy. I'm like, oh God, here we go, man. Yeah, so you really have to go with your testicles out, not your butt out, but your testicles. Yeah, it was not fun. But yeah, at least you can diagnose if there's an issue. So I did this 1.5 years ago and about a half a year ago when I started this fertility protocol, just to have a double checkup to see if I had a varicocele, because you can sink all of this money into fertility medications and it's not cheap. Recombinant FSH, it's not cheap. You want to make sure that it gets to the receptor. So I was able to diagnose that, okay, there's nothing going on internally, right? And no necrotic tissue and no issues with the testicle. So structurally, it all looked good. And then you go in this fertility protocol, and my fertility is, I mean, crazy. My fertility levels are crazy. But you see this with a lot of guys that do a fertility protocol for 6 months and nothing happens, varicocele or a hydrocele, you know, but that's from impact. Hydrocele.
And I mean, and then you sort of deduce from them that, like, a simple question is, when you do a leg press, do you feel any pressure in your groin? Well, a little bit. I feel this little pull on my right groin when I'm in the bottom of a leg press. Just like, right, there's our answer. Just go and get the ultrasound because it sounds like you've got a varicose.
Yeah. It's funny how it works. It's funny, like what's his name? I just had a podcast with him, Stan Efferding. So he went through puberty with a varicocele. And he was actually prescribed testosterone at a very early age because he wasn't producing adequate testosterone levels. And he still got kids later on because he had a surgery to kind of correct that when he was 30, or quite late. because he was already on testosterone replacement therapy and, of course, kicking ass, setting world records. But he still had kids later on after he got that varicocele restored with surgery. And I see this, I've had to recommend this several times during consultations. It doesn't matter what you're going to do. Steroids is not the problem. It's a structural issue, right? Congenital. Blood is not going to the testicles. That's why it doesn't feel right down there. Yeah.
And it's sort of like you're trying to explain to them that it's literally you've got this wall and the hormone is trying to pass through this wall and it's going nowhere. So it's just bouncing off the wall and going back into circulation. So, you've done everything possible. Like you're taking all your antioxidants, you're taking your either your FSH or HMG, and the sperm isn't showing up. And it's just sort of like, well, maybe the HMG is fake. And you're like, well, no, because your bloods show your FSH value is in good range. So, at week 10, I wouldn't expect you to be like azoospermic where there's no sperm whatsoever. We probably expect like maybe 1 or 2 million if we were expecting some level of fibrosis. But when it's zero with that time length of exposure to FSH, it needs to be investigated. Because often like the answer then is, well, would we improve my fertility if we came off and done a fully restorative PCT? And you're just explaining to them, well, now you're just making your own FSH, which is going to bounce off this wall again. So you're going through the pain of a PCT to restore your FSH, which is going nowhere, the same as your HMG. So what answer do you think is like the next step?
Plus, you're going through that roller coaster of, hormones and then getting androgen deficient for a very long time, and it might stay androgen deficient. With the varicocele, and they probably went on TRT because of the varicocele, because they were androgen deficient to begin with, right?
Yeah, and it's just something that just goes undiagnosed with guys. Is literally, have you got this physical blockage in place? And it can be like you said, a hydrocele, it can be self-inflicted. So guys, if you're on leg presses, really pay attention to testicular torsion in the bottom of a leg press when you are in that sort of vulnerable aspect of just high pressure in that area.
Yeah, just don't jerk off so much. No, literally, like, dude, I've seen ultrasounds with a hydrocele on one side, and I'm like, what? This is the side you masturbate with, right? And why is the hydrocele on the right side? Stop jerking off for 90 days, goes away. No, I'm serious, dude. It's all these young guys, right? All these young guys are on Tinder and social media and OnlyFans way too much, and they slap themselves silly. This is the world nowadays. Thank God I'm older and I'm married, so I didn't get in that territory anymore.
I mean, like natural testosterone, dopamine issues that like we even touched on the last podcast, like that's another big massive thing that I'm seeing recently. Like, and that's big buy-in of like that whole, I guess, androgen steroid induced hypergonadism of post-cycle libido issues and dopamine issues, where you're trying to explain to someone like, go and do an organic acid test. Why? Well, I want to see what the dopamine level of your brain is like. Well, what's that going to tell me? Well, it's going to tell us why you can't get an erection or can't get sexually stimulated, even though all your like total testosterone, LH, FSH is all perfect. And it comes back and their VMA level is like less than 2. And you're like, well, no wonder you can't get like sexually stimulated normally because your dopamine level is so low.
Yeah,
that's another like big fire waiting to happen now in the next couple of years of like so many people with like not even ADHD type symptoms, but just literally just manic depressive.
Dopamine issues. And then
where they're gonna have,
you can do a dopamine detox, and you can go on 9-MeBC and take all the stimulus out, but that takes time to recover.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of guys do benefit from L-tyrosine and vitamin B6, B5P supplementation to a certain extent. You can kind of alleviate it, but you never get the same dopaminergic response that you get on dopaminergic compounds like testosterone, trenbolone, etc. Right? You need that signaling downstream to kind of take hold. That's why guys are like, I want the porn stack like I felt on trenbolone. It's not going to work.
And it's toxic because you're even trying to, like, even in consults, when I'm trying to explain to guys, they come to me with like, I've no libido. And when you sort of work through everything, you arrive at like the core message of, oh, my libido isn't the same as when I was on gear. And you're trying to explain to them, you'll never have the same libido as when you're on a raging cycle, as when you're on either TRT or fully recovered post-cycle. Like, you can't, I could never compare my old car, which was an RX-8, Mazda RX-8 with like 250 brake horsepower, two rotor engines, to like the Qashqai 1.9 diesel liter Qashqai car, dad car that I drive now. Like, you could never compare how it feels to drive that sports car versus how it feels to push on the accelerator of this car and like go nowhere. Whereas as soon as you put your foot on the RX-8, the car just shut off. So like you can't have this comparison syndrome, regardless of like even social media, comparison syndrome of your mental clarity and mental state on a cycle versus off can never be compared.
No, I know, but you get used to it though after a couple months off. Like, I've been off now for like 6-7 months, right? And now I'm finally getting used back into my groove, because, and even though I'm not technically off because I'm still using HCG and FSH, right? So my testosterone levels are like 600, 700 nanograms per deciliter, depending on when I measure it. So my levels are good, but the drive and the motivation and you know, the sex drive obviously is not the same, even on basic TRT. And I mean, when I was on 2 grams a test, I mean, dude, destruction left and right, in the gym and at home, and right, and but also in business, because you just stimulated the whole day.
Yeah,
it's not sustainable though.
No, and you're gonna see like that comparison of even like trying to chase, like when someone comes to me with something like that in a consult, like. Not to put any sort of disheartening to it, but you almost end up with this sort of coaching session of, you know, your brain chemistry is never going to be the same. And that's why these things can get highly addictive, in the sense of you want to feel that way all the time. But, you know, then there's the trade-off of your health, that you can't sustain that dopamine drive long term if you want your brain to be fully functioning when you're in your 40s and 50s.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, because then you get the shakiness and the Parkinson-like symptoms, you know, as you sometimes see with older bodybuilders that are really redlining their stuff. You know, when you see them in interviews on Dave Palumbo's show, and you're like, ooh, what this guy did in his younger years, because they've been, I mean, it's clear, right, to you also. You just see these guys, and it's some neurotransmitter issue going on. They're not 100% present anymore. It's a shame to see. You know, the
neurotoxicity. And I mean, like, even someone asked me a question recently on the SN Education forum about they wanted to use some nandrolone, but they were going through some bereavement issues, and they wanted to know, could they use nandrolone for some joint care, so basically joint lubrication with the mineral corticoid activation and all that, and basically wanted to know, you know, is it safe with the sort of brain state that I'm in now to use this compound? And like, the instant answer is no. You're putting a drug in that is completely neurotoxic, that is going to increase your dopamine, which is going to have potential knock-on effects to OCD behavior. Combine that with sort of, I guess, depression and feeling a sense of like, I guess, lulment, that putting in this drug is probably going to amplify those negative emotions as opposed to amplifying positive ones. So like the serious answer to them was no. And more so like MPP maybe with the short half-life, but definitely not nandrolone deca, which is like, basically was looking for the answer of, oh, can I go and get this prescribed to help my joints? And it's sort of like, well, work through the mental instability period with the bereavement, and then maybe look to put in the compound, as opposed to knowing that compound's going to really make things a hell of a lot worse. And, you know, that probably applies to anyone listening here, that you really need to be in the right frame of mind when you're putting some of these compounds in, because they are going to shape how you think and feel.
Yeah, and then the weird thing is you don't even realize that your thought patterns are altered until you come off cycle. And with Trenbolone, that's even the most noticeable. Like 2 weeks later, you realize, like, oh, was I really such a dickhead? And then everybody around you kind of confirms it for you. So yeah, you were insufferable. You know, that's why I haven't touched it in 8 years. And then, but even on the regular DHT derivatives, you're a little bit more irritable, a little bit more snappy, a little bit, quicker and more definitive in your decision making process. And sometimes it's okay to kind of ease back and just stick with TRT or even come off cycle to kind of humble yourself. Because that's what I realized the last 6 months. Your entire thought pattern and how you look at life changes. It's quite weird. Even though I do prefer myself on TRT, I'll be honest. Now I'm a little bit too mellow. My wife has the upper hand too often, so I can't wait to go back on TRT. And I'm like, no, that's not happening anymore, baby.
I mean, 600 is still a good level. I mean,
it's okay.
Sitting. Yeah. I strictly keep mine between 22 to 26 is sort of where I hovers on bloods. So I'm really, I'm happy to keep it down. Like I say to guys, when you're sort of moving from 8 to 24, you're always going to feel different to how it was when you were ever off anyway, because you're technically in this sort of super physiological range anyway.
Yeah, for your endogenous production, right? And of course, the longer you stay there, the more normal it feels. But, at one point you might have to come off for whatever reason. And then you go back to what you produce endogenously, or worse, even lower. Yeah. And then, that's a hard reality check. So I've been doing a lot of contemplation in the last 6 months, 7 months. But I mean, all roads lead to going back on TRT, albeit modest. TRT plus.
I mean, we touched on it like in the first podcast. Mine was, again, my triglycerides when I was sitting at 8 nanomole. I seen metabolic dysfunction from being at a lower level when my metabolism over the period of 6 years had become used to being manipulated to that level. So you have to sort of view again that if you commit to something like this, your commitment is there for good. That when you come off and you move back again, you have that risk of metabolic dysfunction because your pancreatic androgen receptors, your liver androgen receptors, your intestinal ones that we talked about earlier, they're all reliant on this new set level of testosterone versus your hypogonadal level that you're not achieving that activation, so your metabolism will suffer. And so unless you want to eat sawdust to try and make that genomic...
Right. So I mean, we can take myself as an example. Right? I was very regimented with my diet for, let's say, the first 5 months after coming off cycle. And I actually got leaner. And then I went on holiday and I started eating a little bit more freely, which is literally like a 500 calorie increase. So I went from 2,500 to 3,000, which is nothing for a guy my size, 3,000 calories per day. Same food, just more of it. And now I'm fat.
Your metabolic processes completely change. Your insulin sensitivity, your triglyceride disposal completely changes.
Yeah, and again, and even on my blood work, my hemoglobin A1C didn't change, my triglycerides didn't change, but something with the turnover of nutrients, whether that's a thyroid or stuff, you just always start getting fatter and fatter and fatter. You're like, man, what the hell's going on? It's surprising to see. And then I took 5 weeks off, and then everything fell apart, of course. So now I have a little bit of a goal to get back in shape. But getting in shape now. What's up, buddy?
My bedroom story.
I'll read your bedroom story now in a few minutes. You want to say hello to Steve?
Hey, buddy. What's up? How are you?
Good.
Good. You good?
I am on push. You can push. I'll show you now.
You have an Iron Man? Okay, show it to me, please. This is why I love kids.
Right? No. Callum. He wants to show Steve his. You're showing him you've got tabs.
Oh my God! Why didn't I have that when I was younger? Oh, you got the gloves too. Okay, no snapping, please. No snapping.
Right, Callum, it's time for bed.
Ask him if he's Team Iron Man or Team Thanos. Callum.
And even have a bonus.
Here, look cute on it.
It's good.
There you go.
There you go. I have a plug there.
The Iron Man.
This is what you're at in the kitchen, like I said to you.
My
This is great.
My Batman.
This is
Batman.
okay. So, are you guys Team Iron Man, Team Iron Man,
Who
or
are you?
Team
Iron Man or
Thanos?
Thanos?
I'm man because I have to have my Batman.
You're Batman.
Good,
Right,
good.
Come on out. Now, come on out.
We work here. Come on.
I didn't know you had some.
I know someone's asked me. Is that
Right. Right, leave them here. Uh-huh.
Man, I need these toys myself.
Right. Callum. Come on, bring them upstairs. Yes, I'll come up to him in a minute.
I'll let him go in 5 minutes. We got to wrap up. We'll wrap up the show, and then he can play with the toys. It's so amazing that all these kids have the most amazing toys. I remember when I had toys that were not as cool as yours, as theirs.
The two of them, they got them earlier. And the two, one has Iron Man and one has Thanos. So you see in Charlie, the 2-year-old.
They're all battling it out and reenacting the movies.
Yeah. So
that's good.
That's when you're an adult with 2 boys, you can relive toys through them as well.
The childhood, right? Yeah. I remember my mom told me like years ago that I should keep all my toys. So I did. They're all back in Holland. And the next time I go, I'll pick them up so I can slowly feed them to my kids and save myself on child kids. So I have like all these ancient toys from Star Wars, like first generation, toys.
You probably grew up in the 90s.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
It's the White Ranger sword.
It's a Mumra scepter, right? It's a White Power Ranger, or not?
White Power Ranger, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a Mumra scepter from...
that was in my parents' house, so it still works. Oh, the batteries must have went... oh, no, there we go.
They played with it a lot. Your kids are probably who is the White Power Ranger? And then you got to show them, and then you can watch all those old cartoons.
Showed them on Netflix, and now they're obsessed with Power Rangers.
Oh wow! There's actually a new. There was recently a new episode coming out from Power Rangers, where like 3 or 4 of the actors. Yeah, 3 or 4 of the actors.
Rewatched it. It was very, very nostalgic. But when you're like me and you've got the 2 boys, you live through them with toys and whatever else. So
of course,
it's a warning for whenever you have kids.
That's funny. I'm not going to have you keep you from your kids any longer. This was great, man. Thanks so much for all of your insights. I'm sure people are going to love this. Let's get to 50,000 views on this podcast.
Yeah.
All right, guys, make it happen, guys. All right, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Let's not wait a year. We always have a lot to report.
No, absolutely.
So,
it's always a pleasure.
We'll do this again soon. Have a good day, buddy. Take care.
Cheers, Steve. Bye.